Have you noticed something strange? The moment you speak with clarity, someone reaches for a word to put you back in your place. Difficult, too much, intense. You ask a direct question, and somehow you've become the problem in the room, even though nothing you said was untrue. Here's the reframe nobody hands you early enough. That label was never a diagnosis of your character. It's a confession, disguised as an insult, from someone who has just discovered they can't manage you the way they used to. Carl Jung called this projection. What a person cannot face in themselves, they will always find a place to store in someone else. When your honesty makes someone flinch, they rarely examine the flinch, they rename it. And you become the file they store their discomfort in. Watch the timing of it. The word almost never shows up when you're being cruel. It shows up the instant you ask for something reasonable, the instant you stop performing agreement you don't actually feel, the instant a silence sits in the room and you refuse to be the one who rushes to fill it. That pattern is data. Once you see it, you can't pretend you didn't. For a long time, you probably believed that being easy to deal with was a kind of virtue, maybe the highest one available to you. So sentences got rewritten before they left your mouth. Requests got dressed up as suggestions. Apologies got attached to feelings that needed no defense. And somewhere in all that editing, a strange thing happened. It still wasn't enough. The label found you anyway because the label was never really about volume or tone. It was about whether you could be steered. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. Has softening your voice ever actually earned you a listener? Or did it just teach people that your boundaries came with room for negotiation, that a little more pressure would always produce a little more give? Most people are not responding to what you say. They're responding to what they can get away with. If gentler versions of you kept getting the same disrespect as louder ones, gentleness was never the missing ingredient. Real listening is a rare skill, closer to extinct than common. Most people don't listen to understand. They listen for the gap where they can insert themselves again. Genuine listening asks something of a person, to sit inside discomfort without immediately smoothing it over, defending against it, or redirecting it back toward their own experience. Very few people have built that muscle. So instead of admitting the gap, they hand the failure back to you, wrapped in a single convenient word. This is the actual price of clarity. You will be misread by people who were never equipped to receive you accurately. And the harder you work to correct that misreading, the more it hardens into certainty. Your explanations don't land as reasoning to them. They land as confirmation, proof, in their eyes, that something about you does in fact need adjusting. So the real question was never how to stop being difficult. It was whether you'd rather be tolerable to people who misunderstand you or true to the version of yourself they never bothered to meet. The moment you stop performing a smaller, more convenient edition of your own voice for an audience that was never listening anyway, something reorganizes. You notice it first. They notice it not long after. And that reorganization is where the rest of this story begins. In the next part, we'll look at what's actually happening inside the people who reach for that word so quickly, why it's often the last tool available to someone who has run out of ways to keep you where they had you. There is a particular quiet that follows the moment you stop over-explaining yourself, not the quiet of giving up, the quiet of finally seeing clearly. It arrives once you realize the people who labeled you were never trying to understand you. They were trying to keep the arrangement they'd grown comfortable with. Look at when the word actually gets deployed, rarely for unreasonable behavior, almost always for inconvenience. A boundary is inconvenient. A direct question is inconvenient. Refusing to perform that everything's fine when it isn't is, for some people, unforgivably inconvenient. So whoever benefited from your compliance, your endless willingness to be the low-friction one, reaches for the only lever left. Make the conversation about your reaction instead of their action. This isn't new. It's one of the oldest maneuvers in human relationships. Redirect attention from the discomfort someone caused toward the discomfort someone else now dares to express about it. If they can convince you your response is the actual issue, they never have to examine what provoked it. Robert Greene documented this kind of misdirection extensively. The way people determined to dodge accountability will always try to make the argument about the mirror, rather than what's reflected in it. Here's what almost nobody says plainly. The people most likely to call you difficult are frequently the ones who benefited most from the version of you that asked for nothing. The friend who enjoyed your company right up until you disagreed with something. The partner who called you easygoing while you needed nothing from them. The relative who praised your patience until the day you asked for a fraction of it back. Nothing about you shifted. The arrangement that depended on your compliance simply stopped holding. Jung believed most relationships run on unspoken casting decisions, roles people slide into without ever naming them. Somewhere early, you were handed a part. The one who understands, the one who forgives on schedule, the one who never makes a room uncomfortable. You played it well because you'd been taught that this was what love required. But a role isn't an identity, and eventually the effort of performing understanding for people who never returned, it starts to feel less like patience and more like disappearing on a schedule. Here's the part that stings. Many of these people aren't villains. Plenty of them were simply never shown how to sit with discomfort. No one modeled real listening for them, so a plain sentence lands in their nervous system as a threat rather than as information. And instead of building a new skill on the spot, they reach for the oldest label available. It's easier to call you difficult than to admit, I don't know how to hear this without feeling attacked. None of that requires you to keep absorbing the fallout. You're allowed to understand exactly why someone struggles and still refuse to keep folding yourself around that struggle indefinitely. Those two things aren't in conflict. Holding both at once is closer to what maturity actually looks like than either extreme on its own. Watch what happens once you stop trying to be more digestible. Nothing shifts on the surface at first. They still expect the old, cushioned version of you, but it isn't there anymore. You say the thing plainly. You name the pattern out loud once, without 3 layers of apology wrapped around it. And in that small moment, something in the dynamic fractures. Some will test it almost on reflex, the way a hand still reaches for a light switch after the bulb has burned out. They'll push a little harder, expecting the familiar retreat. When it doesn't arrive, when you simply hold the line without flinching, something in them has to recalibrate, often for the first time, without you rescuing them from the discomfort of it. Nietzsche observed that people rarely forgive a change in someone else, because that change forces a confrontation with the parts of themselves that never moved. When you stop being agreeable on command, you're not just altering your own behavior, you're holding a mirror up to everyone whose comfort was quietly financed by your compliance. Most people would rather shatter that mirror than study their reflection in it. So the next time that word arrives, pause before absorbing it. Ask what specifically triggered it: cruelty or clarity, chaos or a boundary. 9 times out of 10, you'll find the same answer. The label appeared right after you stopped playing the smaller part in the arrangement. Once that pattern is visible, the word loses its verdict-like weight and becomes something closer to data about the person using it. In the next section, we'll go further into what happens when you stop trying to earn understanding from people who were never planning to offer it, and why the resulting quiet unsettles them more than any explanation ever could. There's a distinct kind of fatigue that builds from constantly being generous toward people who have never once extended that generosity back. It isn't physical exhaustion, it's the fatigue of translation. The ongoing labor of converting your truth into something mild enough for someone else to receive without effort. You've likely done this for years without naming it, rehearsing a feeling before you shared it, preparing a request so it sounded like an offer instead of a need. apologizing before a sentence had even finished forming, purely to spare the listener the discomfort of hearing you plainly. All of that invisible labor spent making yourself easier to accept. And here's the quiet cost buried in that habit. Every time you dilute your own truth to protect someone else's comfort, you confirm, without meaning to, that the diluted version was the one worth offering. So they never have to build the capacity to receive anything more direct. They never learn because you never required it of them. That's the real price of being endlessly agreeable. Not that people resent you for it, often the opposite. They're fond of the version of you that asks for little and disrupts nothing. But that fondness attaches to your restraint, not to you. There's a real difference between being loved and being comfortably kept, in a form that costs the other person nothing. Nietzsche wrote that the compulsion to keep proving yourself, to keep reshaping a message until it finally lands, is itself a quiet admission that you don't yet believe your first, unedited version deserved to be heard. Sit with that for a moment. Every over-explanation, every extra layer of softening is a small vote against your own instincts, a vote you likely never cast on purpose. Somewhere along the line, that instinct was rewarded when you complied and punished when you didn't, until directness itself began to register as risk. What nobody tells you about that trade is what it costs internally. The more practiced you become at editing yourself down, the further you drift from your own signal. You start second-guessing reactions that were simply honest, wondering if you're overreacting when you're often just reacting cleanly for what feels like the first time in years. That isn't fragility, it's a nervous system trained repeatedly to treat its own honest output as an inconvenience. Eventually, you land on a choice that seems enormous but is actually plain. Keep editing yourself for an audience that was never really listening, or let understanding become optional instead of mandatory. That second option unsettles anyone who's used approval-seeking as a survival strategy. And it should unsettle you a little too, because some relationships won't survive contact with your unfiltered voice. But the ones that do will finally be relating to something real, not to a carefully managed addition built for someone else's ease. This isn't a case for harshness. It's a case against confusing warmth with self-erasure. You can remain kind and still be exact. You can stay tender and still be unmistakable. Those were never opposites. They only felt that way because somewhere you were taught that occupying space required an apology stitched to it. Jung wrote about the persona, the mask built for social acceptability, and warned that identifying too fully with that mask eventually cuts a person off from whoever they actually are underneath it. Plenty of people who get called difficult aren't, in any real sense. They're simply people who started setting down a mask that others had grown used to looking at. Setting down a mask always disorients whoever's nearby, because it forces a relationship they thought they understood to be renegotiated on the spot. You're allowed to retire the performance of ease. You're allowed to let a silence hang in a room without rushing to patch it with reassurance. You're allowed to state the true thing once and let it exist without 3 trailing sentences justifying your right to feel it. That single move, say it, then stop, is one of the more disorienting things you can do to people accustomed to your endless clarifications, because those clarifications were rarely for their benefit. They were protection dressed up as generosity. Watch what happens once you actually stop. The people who value you for real will lean toward this steadier register, curious rather than alarmed. The ones who only valued your compliance will grow unsettled, maybe even combative. That reaction isn't proof you did something wrong. It's proof the old terms have expired and they haven't caught up yet. There's a version of this that shows up at work, and it's worth naming separately, because the stakes there feel different, more tangible, harder to walk away from. You raise a concern in a meeting, calmly, backed by facts, and somehow you leave the room known as combative. A colleague raises the identical concern a week later and gets praised for their courage. The content didn't change, the messenger did. This isn't a coincidence, and it isn't really about tone, no matter how often that explanation gets offered. It's about who's allowed to be inconvenient without consequence and who isn't. People who've never had to fight for airtime often mistake their comfort for a neutral standard, and anyone who disrupts that comfort gets filed under difficult, regardless of how measured they actually were. Watching this pattern play out repeatedly can make you doubt your own read on a room. It shouldn't. The pattern is real, well documented, and it has very little to do with your delivery. What tends to happen next is a kind of self-editing that becomes so automatic you stop noticing it's happening at all. You start pre-approving your own thoughts before they leave your mouth, running each one through a filter built entirely around someone else's threshold for comfort. Is this too pointed? Should I wait until after the meeting? Would it land better coming from someone else? That filter feels like professionalism. Often it's closer to a tax you've agreed to pay simply for having an opinion in a room that wasn't built to expect one from you. Fromm wrote about the difference between belonging that requires erasure and belonging that allows for genuine difference, arguing that the first kind isn't really belonging at all. It's a transaction disguised as connection, a workplace, a friend group, a family that only welcomes you on the condition that you stay quiet about the things that matter is not offering you inclusion. It's offering you a seat on the condition that the seat stays empty of anything real. Recognizing that distinction changes how you interpret the friction that follows honesty. If a room only tolerates you when you're agreeable, the room was never actually safe. It was simply calm. And calm isn't the same thing as safety. Calm can be maintained by anyone willing to disappear enough. Safety is what remains once you stop disappearing and the room holds anyway. This is also where a quieter, more practical shift starts to matter. You begin choosing your battles not out of fear, the way you might have before, but out of strategy. Not every room deserves your full, unfiltered voice, and that's not a contradiction of everything said so far. It's discernment. There's a difference between softening yourself because you're afraid of the reaction and choosing your moment because you understand the room isn't ready to receive the full weight of what you're saying yet. The first comes from self-abandonment. The second comes from self-possession. They can look identical from the outside and feel entirely different from the inside. Over time, this discernment becomes less effortful. You stop needing to calculate every interaction because your baseline shifts. Where you once defaulted to accommodation and occasionally allowed yourself directness as an exception, you begin defaulting to honesty and reserving accommodation for the moments that genuinely call for it. That reversal, small as it sounds, changes the entire texture of how you move through a day. In the next section, we'll look at what happens on the other side of that discomfort. Why the people who once dismissed your voice eventually start seeking it out again, once the room feels quieter, colder, less honest without it. At first, nothing announces itself. You simply stop over-explaining, and the day continues as if nothing shifted. People keep talking over you the way they always did, assuming the accommodating edition of you is still available on request. It isn't. And gradually, its absence starts to register. It shows up in small places first. A question that used to earn 3 paragraphs of context now gets a single, clean sentence. A conflict that once triggered a lengthy apology from you now meets a level, unhurried silence. A boundary that would have arrived dressed as a suggestion now simply gets stated once without cushioning around it. They register the shorter sentences well before they understand the reason behind them. That's where their discomfort begins. Not because you've become unkind, but because you've become harder to predict in a way they haven't yet learned to navigate. They built expectations on a version of you engineered for convenience, and a version that no longer performs. Convenience reads to them as a code they can't crack. Some will test it almost automatically, the way a hand still reaches for a switch after the bulb's gone. They'll push, expecting the familiar retreat, the old apology, the usual rush to smooth things over. When none of that arrives, when you simply stay where you are, something in them has to recalibrate, often without the rescue they were counting on. Robert Greene wrote that the moment you stop chasing someone's approval, you frequently gain it. Not because approval was ever the actual goal, but because people are drawn toward composure and repelled by visible need. The irony runs deep here. All those years spent editing yourself to be understood may have earned you less regard, not more. Because need, even quiet need, reads as weakness to anyone scanning for it. Once you stop requiring their understanding to feel complete, your presence settles, and settled presence pulls attention in an entirely different way. None of this is a manipulation tactic. It's simply what happens when someone stops outsourcing their sense of worth to an audience that was never generous with it. You aren't withholding your voice to punish anyone. You're withholding the apologetic, overmanaged edition of it because it no longer describes you accurately. That distinction carries weight. This isn't performed detachment engineered to provoke a reaction. It's the natural result of no longer needing a reaction to feel secure. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. Some relationships won't survive this shift. People who only valued the endlessly accommodating edition of you may pull away, may complain that you've changed, may even claim they liked you better before. Let that be true without letting it move you an inch. What they preferred was the arrangement, not your company. What they're mourning isn't you, it's the convenience they lost. But something else unfolds too, more slowly, quieter. People capable of real connection, the ones never threatened by your honesty to begin with, start leaning in. They notice the steadiness. They notice you no longer need 3 attempts to be taken seriously. They start listening on different terms, not because your volume changed, but because you finally sound like someone worth hearing without an interpreter. Viktor Frankl, writing out of circumstances almost nobody could survive intact, insisted that one freedom can never be confiscated: the freedom to choose your stance inside whatever conditions you're handed. You cannot force anyone who was never taught to sit with discomfort to suddenly develop that capacity overnight. But you can choose fully whether you'll keep accommodating a skill someone else never built. That choice is entirely yours, and it can't be taken from you. This is the turning point, not the moment they finally understand. Because for some people, that moment may never arrive. It's the moment you stop needing it to arrive in order to feel like yourself. Once that need loosens its grip, the word difficult stops functioning as a verdict and starts sounding like something being said about a version of you that no longer requires anyone's sign-off to exist. There's an emotional undertow to all of this worth naming honestly, rather than rushing past. Letting go of the performance changes how you measure your own worth, not just how others experience you. For years, maybe without noticing, you gauged your value by how smoothly you slid into a room. No complaints meant you were doing it right. No flinching meant you were safe. That measurement felt like peace, but it was closer to a slow subtraction, a quiet agreement to take up a little less room with every exchange that demanded your compliance. Once the performance ends, that internal gauge has to change too. Worth can no longer be measured by an absence of friction, because a little friction is now the honest, occasional cost of simply existing as yourself. That's uncomfortable at the start. You might catch yourself bracing after a sentence you didn't cushion. A flicker of guilt might follow a boundary that arrived without an apology stapled to it. That discomfort doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means an old pattern is losing its grip, and old patterns rarely leave quietly. Give yourself room to feel that discomfort without reversing course because of it. This is where a lot of people stop, right at the point where the reflex to smooth things over gets loudest. They mistake the discomfort of change for evidence that the change was a mistake. But discomfort and danger aren't the same thing. Discomfort is simply what growth feels like in a body that spent years equating safety with taking up as little space as possible. Jung wrote about the shadow, the parts of a person pushed underground because they were never welcomed by the people around them. For a lot of people labeled difficult, The shadow isn't cruelty or temper. It's plain, unvarnished honesty, buried after it made someone uncomfortable once, with the lesson absorbed quietly. Don't do that again. Recovering that buried honesty doesn't make you harsher. It makes you more whole. Nothing foreign is being added to your character. The full range of it is simply visible again, all at once. That recovery ripples outward in ways that are hard to predict in advance. People who never really saw you begin to, some with curiosity, some with resentment, depending entirely on what they needed from the version of you that stayed quiet. The difference is easy to spot once you know to look for it. Whoever feels relieved by your honesty was relating to you the entire time. Whoever feels threatened by it was relating to the role, not the person underneath it. There's a real grief tucked inside that discovery, and it deserves acknowledgement rather than a rushed exit. Some of that history mattered. Some of it was genuine, even if it depended on an addition of you that couldn't hold indefinitely. You're allowed to mourn the ease of being effortlessly liked, even while choosing the harder, truer path of being fully known. Both can be true at once. Growth rarely arrives without some grief attached, and pretending otherwise only stalls the process. On the far side of that grief is something worth the toll. Relationships, work, ordinary conversations, all built on something sturdier than management. Built on the actual person, not a curated release built for someone else's comfort. That sturdiness doesn't announce itself with noise. It simply holds, quietly, under pressure that would have flattened the older, more accommodating version of you years ago. In the final section, we'll bring all of this together. Why the people who reach for that word are, more often than not, meeting a version of themselves they've never had to face, and why the healthier path was never about occupying less room. It was about occupying it honestly. There's a moment, undramatic and easy to miss, when you stop asking whether you're too much and start asking whether the people around you were ever really listening in the first place. It doesn't arrive with any fanfare. It shows up in the middle of an ordinary conversation when you say something true, plainly, and notice the old reflex to apologize for it simply doesn't fire. For a long time, you probably believed being difficult was a defect to correct, that with the right words, the right timing, enough patience, the people who dismissed you would finally get it. Here's the truth that took too long to reach you. Some people were never going to get it, no matter how precisely you phrased the truth, because listening was never a skill they'd built. That's not a failure in your delivery. It's a limit in their capacity, and it isn't yours to close. Jung wrote that whatever we fail to make conscious in ourselves, we experience as fate, the same pattern surfacing again and again across relationships. People who've never examined their own defensiveness, their discomfort with plain speech, their habit of rooting responsibility back onto whoever names a problem clearly, will keep experiencing your clarity as an attack. That loop isn't yours to solve. It belongs to them, and it will keep repeating in every relationship they enter until they finally turn and look at it directly. Your task was never to become digestible enough that anyone could take you in without effort. That was a story handed to you, likely early, probably by people who benefited from your compliance more than they'd ever admit. Somewhere along the way, ease got mistaken for goodness, and directness got mistaken for cruelty. But those aren't the same thing. Cruelty is intentional harm. Directness is simply the truth, unaccompanied by an excuse for existing. You don't owe anyone the excuse. You don't owe anyone a request rewritten as an apology, or a boundary dressed up as a suggestion, or honesty compressed until it stops disturbing anybody's comfort. You're permitted to say the true thing once, clearly, and let it stand without a trailing paragraph justifying your right to have said it. That single act, stating it and then stopping, is one of the more grounded forms of self-respect available to a person. None of this means abandoning care for how something is said. Tone still counts. Timing still counts. Compassion still counts. Particularly for people making a genuine, imperfect effort to meet you honestly. This isn't an argument for discarding kindness. It's an argument against mistaking kindness for self-erasure. Clarity and warmth were never opposed. They only felt that way because somewhere you absorbed the idea that being seen required forgiveness in advance. Watch what unfolds as you practice this. Relationships built on your compliance will strain because compliance was the load-bearing wall, and walls crack when the weight above them shifts. But relationships built on something real, on genuine mutual regard, won't just survive your clarity, they'll deepen because of it. People who were capable of real listening all along finally get access to the actual version of you, the one that stopped editing itself down for anyone's convenience. And here's the last piece, the one that matters most. You were never actually difficult. You were honest in rooms that had only ever rewarded quiet. You were plain with people who had built their entire comfort around never hearing an unvarnished sentence. Their discomfort in your presence was never a verdict on your character. It was a mirror, and most people will call the mirror difficult before they'll admit to what they saw reflected in it. So the next time that word finds you, let it pass through without landing. Treat it as information rather than injury. Ask what it's actually describing, your honesty or someone else's limit. 9 times out of 10, you already know which one it is. And once you know it clearly, you stop needing anyone else to confirm it for you. You are not difficult. You were simply speaking in a register that required a listener willing to grow, and some of them never will. That was never yours to control, and it was never something you needed to fix by making yourself progressively harder to notice. If this reached you, don't explain it. Live it. Type, "I stopped apologizing for the truth" in the comments, and let it stand exactly as written, with nothing trailing behind it to soften the landing. If you want more of this, clarity that doesn't excuse itself, subscribe. Quietly, deliberately, no performance required. The next truth is already waiting. You'll know it when it finds you.